So now let's go into the discussion about automated model selection. So in regression, sometimes if you have a whole lot of predictor variables, you just don't have the time to manually figure out what the different combinations of those variables are to be able to get the best fit. And so sometimes you can use one of three different kinds of stepwise approaches. The first one is forward selection, where one predictor variable is added at a time, and our model is evaluated after the addition of each variable. With backward elimination, you have all of your variables in the model, and you start removing one at a time, evaluating the model at each step. And then with classic stepwise, you can either add or remove a variable at each iteration of your model. So typically what is done with the selection process is that we look at the F statistic evaluated at each step. Now, if you use different software packages, you can choose a different value. Like you could use the metric of maximize or figuring out what your R squared is or your adjusted R squared. But standard packages that use stepwise for sure will look at your F statistic. But some of the others have, other bells and whistles. But basically you set a minimum p-value or significance that corresponds to your f-test for the variable to enter the model, and a maximum allowable p-value or f-significance value required for that variable to stay in the model. And so in the case of forward selection, the first predictor variable with the largest positive or negative correlation to the outcome variable is going to be selected to making that model. Because remember, the larger that absolute value is for that correlation, that means the more linear the relationship is between that predictor variable and your outcome variable. And if that F statistic is big enough, the variable will stay in your model. Then a second predictor variable is added, and the F statistic is reevaluated to determine if the variable is retained or rejected. And then the process will continue until all of the variables that have been selected for analysis have been examined. With backward selection, we start with everything in the model and evaluate the F statistic for each variable as if it were the last one that we added to the model. And so then we look at the one with the smallest F value, which gives me the largest P value, and we remove it if that corresponding value is outside the pre-selected range for that statistic that we were looking at. So if the F statistic is too small, which means your p-value is larger than your predefined cutoff value, we would remove it from the model. And the algorithm would continue in this direction until all of our predictor variables have been evaluated. And I want to clarify on this. This is all the predictor variables that you have selected for analysis. So it's not going to just let loose on your data set. You do have to select the predictor variables that you're going to use. So with stepwise regression, the partial F for each predictor variable is going to be examined, just as we did before. But one thing that we need to keep in mind is a predictor variable that was added in an earlier step can now be removed at a later step, or if it was removed early on, we can add it later, just depending on what's going to maximize that F value for us. And so this approach tends to be much faster than the other two approaches, and tends to have fewer problems with overfitting the data because you have that flexibility of both adding and removing predictor variables. With stepwise regression, we also need to keep in mind that, once again, it's only maximizing that one variable. And so, it doesn't matter which approach that we're looking at, it doesn't guarantee the best model because it's only looking at maximizing the significance of your F-test in this example. So you've got to keep in mind, sometimes your theoretical knowledge of the problem says that you need to include a model that the stepwise algorithm took out for you. It also doesn't always evaluate anything other than your F statistic if that's the one you have selected. So it's not going to account for multicollinearity or maybe, as I said earlier, the business understanding. And so sometimes you still have to physically go back and manipulate it. So with stepwise regression, what I really recommend that you use is that you do it first as maybe an exploratory approach, and then you go through and look at multicollinearity, see if additional variables need to be taken out, look at the theory or the business understanding and see if there's certain maybe crucial predictor variables that you need to add back to your model. So your final model really needs to be one that you have tweaked, but stepwise is a really good way to get started for you to find that more optimum solution. So one thing to keep in mind from John Tukey is the important question about methods is not how to do the method, but why you're doing the method that you're choosing.